We have enabling and disabling of the interrupt. So as you saw in the interrupt lecture, like how interrupt is enabled. So we all know that if a device needs to raise and request to the like raise and request for an enable, IR in that time, but interrupt request. Okay, if the device wants to raise an IR, it will send a signal to the IR line, and that through that signal that will go to the processor. Now if the request is accepted, the processor responds by sending the INTA signal, and that's how the interrupt it's been enabled. So while interrupt is enabled, the currently executing program in the processor stops and performs the instruction from of the interrupt, and then continues performing the same task after completion of this instruction of the interrupt. So that's how the enabling part of the interrupt is. While coming to disable, there is not one thing. If you just pause and read this, you should be able to understand. And while coming to the so here another thing is the same thing you can write in the interrupt hardware. So whatever is there in the interrupt hardware, the same thing will come in the enabling of the interrupt. Only the new thing is how to disable the interrupt. So sometimes what happens, like the IO device might need some data. So the folder is there in the memory, but that is empty. So there is nothing that the IO device can take back. So suppose the IO, we know that IO device itself that sends a request for interrupt, right? Now IO has sent a request for interrupt, but there is no data for the IO device to take. So here the interrupt is been disabled because the it cannot perform any function or action over there. So suppose in the middle of the above sequence of the execution, when an interrupt occurs, for example from a printer, if there is no output lines to print, the interrupt is disabled by processor with accepting IR, without accepting, sorry, here without